Blessed be this community. May it be so. Our reading today, There Has to Be Belief, was written by A. Powell Davis. Within our lives, there has to be belief. For a little while, perhaps the earlier half of an individual lifetime, perhaps for a generation or two in the maturing of a civilization, people can get along without belief. Then the deficiency reveals itself. The momentum of an earlier faith becomes exhausted. The spiritual impulse that is needed to meet new situations is not forthcoming or is too feeble when it does appear, because the soul is sick. The mind, even the brilliant mind, is beset with fevers. Even the plainest truth, if it be on the moral level, if it makes its appeal to conscience, is disfigured and derided. Irreligion takes the place of religion. Doubt is exalted as though it were belief. Then on the altars of forsaken gods, justice and righteousness are sacrificed to monstrous images, such images as Hitler, emblems of mutiny against the laws and liberties that centuries of struggle have established, symbols of the soul's apostasy, polluted, tokens of the heart's repudiation, of the loveliness of life. Disinheritance, spiritual disinheritance. That is the key to understanding the plight of modern men and women. That is the reason, too, for the strangeness of so many of our subsidiary faiths. How is it, we wonder, that apparently intelligent people accept such odd religions nowadays? Do not look for the answer in their mentalities. Look for it in the lostness of their souls. No amount of intelligence can compensate an empty heart for its bereavement, and no degree of mentality can comfort the wanderings of a lost soul. Here ends the reading. Striking the right chord. The most basic behavior that we engage in when we perceive that we are lacking something in our lives is seeking and questioning. These are major ways in which we learn about ourselves, our surroundings, and each other. We may begin comparing our career choices or our financial worth to others. But at some juncture, we come to realize that the acquisition and accumulation of things will never fill the void felt inside of us. When this happens, the focus turns inward, and many people begin to look towards some form of spirituality. Before finding a home in Unitarian Universalism, some of you may have experienced this in your personal lives. Or perhaps you notice behavioral changes in a friend or relative after they discovered a publication that captivated their attention, drawing them into faith-centered groups to fill a void. There was a very noticeable shift in consciousness toward internal searching after author Elizabeth Gilbert's widely read book, Eat, Pray, Love, which was later made into a film. While this may have appeared to be a sudden occurrence, the premise of the book probably touched on some feelings that have been brewing in many women for some time. Actress Julia Roberts, who starred in the film, informs that this was her first encounter with Hindu spiritual practices and has since become a practicing Hindu. When we encounter such behavioral shifts in people close to us, sometimes we feel awkward being around them because the topics of conversations change and become stilted, as if a personal decision has become an indictment on someone else's way of life. Some of you may have been and still find yourselves the object of scrutiny by family members who remain part of mainstream religion and fail to grasp the basics of Unitarian Universalism. They remain mystified about a religion that is comprised of spiritual diversity without the constraints and demands of religious dogma. Mostly the question is, and I quote, how is it possible to have various personal theologies under one umbrella? End quote. Over the years, I've had conversations with people who have said that after 20 years or so of claiming Unitarian Universalism as their chosen faith, relatives still voice concerns about them losing their souls to a punitive afterlife. Somehow, their view of spiritual fulfillment as a process is all or nothing. However, we are all on individual paths, and just as our taste in clothes and food differ at various times, so do our spiritual needs. Author Eckhart Tolle informs that all religions are equally false and equally true, depending on how they are used. He continues saying you can use them in service of the ego or in service of the truth. If you believe only your religion is the truth, you are using it in service of the ego. And that's when religion becomes ideology. Unitarian Universalism doesn't work that way because it offers freedom to grow in spirit without the fear of judgment. And despite the diverse dialects of spirit in our denomination, the 7 principles are the common guides pointing us in the direction to align ourselves with truth. But in our consumer-driven society, the common assumption is that fame and fortune automatically transfer into peace and happiness. However, a shift in consciousness brings to the forefront that money cannot take the place of the dissonance from the spirit of life, the mystery known by many names, sometimes called God. There's a 6-episode documentary series titled Now with Natalie that features some of today's leading figures in entertainment, sports, and fashion, sharing how their spiritual journeys have positively impacted their lives and careers. The aim of this documentary is to lift the veil up on celebrity, exploring how a culture of compete and compare leads to many stars grappling with industry pressure, struggling to define happiness on their own terms, and leading a more purpose-filled life. When we've seen the spotlight shown on the shift in spiritual consciousness of famous people, it has often occurred after some life-altering health crisis, either physical or mental. 2 such examples are pop star Demi Lovato and actress Lady Gaga. Demi credits her well-being to spiritual healing and after suffering from a near-fatal drug overdose and battling eating disorders for years. And Lady Gaga talks about how much her faith has helped her navigate her struggles with chronic mental and physical illnesses. We each seek and find spiritual fulfillment in our own way. However, the resulting influence of Calvinist thought about predestination and salvation lies just below the surface of Western culture, making the religious terrain harsh and difficult to navigate. It is so deeply rooted that many people find it too challenging when attempting to live in the world and not be of it. Fear of traps waiting to ensnare and dismantle a new way of life seem to lurk around every corner. But when the desire that calls us to find the better parts of ourselves becomes strong enough, we often go to great lengths to achieve those goals. However, every spiritual journey has its share of ups and downs. And when things reach their lowest, it's known as the dark night of the soul. The dark night of the soul often begins with some sort of trigger or disruption that we're unprepared for in some way. Now, the concept of the dark night of the soul was first coined in a poem 16th century Spanish mystic St. John of the Cross wrote about. But the idea of a spiritual depression is a part of many different spiritual and religious traditions, including Buddhism, where it's referred to as falling into the pit of the void. Eckhart Tolle tells us it's a term used to describe a collapse of perceived meaning in life. It's an eruption into one's life of a deep sense of meaningless. While never easy to navigate, it is an essential part of spiritual awakenings and is sure to teach us some lessons. My experience of being in a spiritual desert came after grappling with the collapse of a 28-year marriage and disappointment in the way its dissolution was handled by the church. Everything that was meaningful in my life suddenly seemed meaningless. And after 40 years of devotion, leaving the church appeared to be a sudden and rash decision to family and friends. But it was a final straw heaped on years of dissatisfaction with the tenets of the church and personal beliefs. Like many who came before me, I struggled with the feeling of spiritual emptiness or abandonment by God. I was no longer able to hear that still small voice that I had always relied on for guidance. Encountering this kind of spiritual emptiness turns into some of the darkest hours, but it also teaches us a valuable lesson if we're open to receiving it. It will accentuate what we need to release or otherwise transform, becoming the catalyst for moving us to more depth and clearing, peeling back the layers to reveal our authentic selves with a deeper life's purpose. In my case, a spiritual call to ministry followed. There's always some reluctance to incorporate elements of familiar patterns and customs that existed prior to spiritual awakening. And no one can tell you how to embody spirituality. But I can tell you that things like active service, yoga, and other physical actions speak to the body and how it aligns with spirit. I wasn't abandoned by God, but for all the changes in my secular life, including divorce and disconnection with my faith community, it was I who abandoned connection to the divinity within. The I am, that is the innermost essence that Christian mystics call the Christ within, and Buddhists call the Buddha nature, and Hindus call the indwelling God. In the sensory overloaded world that we live in, sometimes people need to shut out the secular voices and influences around them to focus on the inner deepening that they are attempting to achieve. But you don't need to travel thousands of miles from home like I did to the Hawaiian Islands to discover the indwelling spirit, because wherever you go, there you are. Moreover, for the heart It's always about moving from a space of openness and love. But if you only do it in part of your life, like when you're at home with your family, then that's the limits of your love. It's not fully integrated into your life. And if you feel like people wouldn't understand you coming from a space of love at your work, then maybe you should think a little bit more about what it is you're doing. I'm not recommending that you hug and kiss everyone at your workplace, and I'm not saying that you can't if it's appropriate. Understanding and boundaries are met. What I am saying is that integrating love is about how you reply within a disagreement. It's about how you listen to others, and it's about how you are with your colleagues and family, as well as friends. That's how you bring spirituality more deeply into other spaces of your life. To live in balance, we must start with a strong foundation that can help us walk the tightrope of life. Being in balance not only helps us through our daily lives, but it is also vital in dealing with the kind of traumatic occurrences we all face, like illnesses and loss through death. For me, spiritual practices help bring everything else into perspective. Spirituality forms the basis for work, play, time with family, even exercise and nutrition. Some of you may already have a spiritual practice for aligning mind, body, and spirit. But for those who don't, I suggest beginning with 15 minutes each morning to give thanks for the breath of life and the possibilities of the next 24 hours being better than the last. Maybe you should consider joining Cor and Judith here in their meditation group. Like physical exercise or any discipline, it takes practice and step-by-step building to begin striking the right chord. From my heart to yours, may it be so.